Kevin, I want to welcome you to the show today.
It's my pleasure to be here. I'm happy to see you again, and I'm eager to share with what I know.
Well, one of the big things, Kevin, is I wanted to give my listeners a little bit of a background about yourself, and they've obviously heard kind of the long history, but I wanted to talk about what's really super interesting for me is I'm in the technology space, and a lot of our listeners are as well. But I'm endlessly fascinated with your you like to talk about the Amish, for example, and I love for people to understand because my wife is from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and I went to Penn State, and so I'm very much aware of the Amish influence within the state, and I like to see how you draw the past and the old approaches to things, even though you're a modern futurist talking about where the technology is going. So maybe we could start there as a starting point.
Yeah, that's really a good point, because we tend to define technology, as Alan Kay did, as anything that was invented after we were born. So we wind up kind of using that term to talk about the new stuff that, as Danny Hillis says, that doesn't quite work yet. That's technology to us. But in fact, technology is actually all the old stuff. And most of the technology in our lives is old stuff. It's the stuff of the wood around us, the concrete, the plumbing, the electricity. So all this is technology, and that is all old stuff. And so when we talk about technology, we should really be talking about the 95% of it that's been around long before we were born. But we tend to get caught up in talking about the new stuff that's not quite working yet. And so the Amish are, I have an interest in the Amish, not so much because they use old things, but because they have developed a very interesting way of deciding what they're going to use. And so one of the patterns we see with technology today is that there is basically more technology being made than we individually can even use ourselves. And so we are, in a certain sense, selecting to choose to use some things and not another. And what's interesting about the Amish is that they have a system for this, that there's actually something that they have made. And the primary difference is between the Amish and us is not that they use old-fashioned tools, but and by the way, they use tools and they have hackers. It's just that they're a little behind the times. So the Amish, though, they decide collectively on what to choose, whereas we decide individually. And that collective process is interesting. And they have two criteria that they're using, which could be beneficial to us even as individuals making these choices. And they're two criteria: deciding whether to adopt a new technology or not, like mobile phones. Should the Amish have mobile phones or not? And the two criteria they use are, does it allow our family to have 3 meals a day together? And does it keep our community together? Does it keep the money in the community? Does it keep our time in the community? So the reason why they will have buggies, horse and buggies, is because it restricts them to only going 15 miles in one direction. That's the maximum they can do with a horse and buggy. And so if they have to get everywhere with a horse and buggy, that means that they have to do everything locally. They have to shop locally. They have to go to the doctors locally. They have to go locally. And so everything stays locally. So that's the idea. And so to the question about whether they should have cell phones, well, the normal way that they decide things is the other way is they have evidence-based decisions. And so they have Amish early adopters. These are usually guys in their community who want to use a tool. And so the bishop will say, Ivan, you can use this, but we are watching you to see whether it increases your time with your family and whether it increases your engagement with the community. And so Ivan will be one of the first people to have a cell phone, a mobile phone. And they're all watching how it impacts his life, whether they allow him to keep it or to have other people have it. And the short answer to this little question about the Amish is the Amish are adopting flip phones. They're not
Yeah.
so much about smartphones, but they're adopting flip phones because they have a dispersion pattern where they start new communities. And so the young people going off, they're able to keep in touch with their family and maintain the gossip lines and all this stuff. And it actually, they see it keeping their families and communities together through the use of mobile phones. So they are slowly adopting mobile phones, even though they don't have phone lines coming into it. I think this idea of articulating what it is that you are going to, what are the qualities that you're looking for as you try to decide whether you're going to use new technology? If you're going to use Twitter or something, what is it that you're trying to get from it? What are you trying to optimize? And the Amish have an answer, and I think it would help us to have an answer.
So it's interesting because you have the Cool Tools book, which is a fascinating book, a large. What a project that must have been to put it together. But I really enjoyed reading that when it was released, and I know that you also have recommendo. And you really it's what's interesting is that you let the new technologies in, meaning you're constantly evaluating and reviewing, yet you seem to have this observational effect where you're selecting what and why you're recommending, and it seems like that's the approach you've taken, almost like that Amish approach.
Yes, I'm a minimalist in terms of the technologies that I actually deal with every day. I try to keep it to a minimum, but I'm a maximalist in terms of encouraging this pool of things that we get to choose from. So I encourage and embrace and will try almost anything, but I'm pretty selective about things that I actually wind up using every day, because there is a cost to every technology that we use. Everything has a cost, and that cost is psychological. It's in terms of the maintenance of requiring it to keep it going. It's the opportunity cost of other things that we can't do. So there are tremendous costs to these technologies. And so I am very, very selective in which ones I will use, but I will try, as part of my job, anything. And I encourage the expansion and the abundance of possible technologies. And I think we want to have a large pool to choose from. We want to have, and that's what technology gives us in the end, is increased choices. It doesn't really necessarily lead to happiness or other things, but it leads to choices.
Yeah, because I never get the sense from reading your material that you're against a technology. It's more that you're more advocating the wisdom of discernment, almost in selecting, as you're mentioning, what is best and most appropriate to allow into your experience.
Yes, right, exactly. So I see life itself, and of course, technology is the acceleration of the same life forces, evolutionary forces, self-organizing forces that make it. And what they all sort of point towards is increased choices and possibilities, things that we could not do now, things that we can do now that we could not before, even though most of the old forms stick around. They don't go away. So, a mom and pop restaurant, that will never go away. That will always be an option, but now you have ghost kitchens as another option. You have dash door delivery. You've got additional ones, but even though the old ones are never going to go away, the corporation, the big corporation, like organized, the modern corporation, that's going to continue. But we'll have some new options like a DAO, a crypto-enabled DAO, as a possibility. So it's not necessarily so the old forms, a partnership, two guys in the garage, those will continue as viable choices, but we'll have additional new ones as well.
Yeah, because I was interesting. You've been the only. I was looking through my old copy of What Technology Wants, and what was really shocking to me, and it's so much fun to read it, is just the evolution, for example, of a helmet that is a medieval helmet, and it was, and you really what is my first really entree into the stacking effect of technology over time. And one of your points was they don't disappear, even the flint. And so I don't know why that is so powerful for me to see, because I'm involved in my business is involved in the modern security for enterprises. So it's always the most modern techniques. But I have this deep appreciation from where we've come from. And you do as well, because you were there at the founding of the internet. Mm-hmm. I'd love to know what your thoughts are about what value people can get from understanding historical stacking of what's happened with technologies, and why that is useful to understand.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we're kind of come to realize recently is that there is a gestation period for technology. In a certain sense, we have almost no no chance of really predicting the future in any detail correctly. It's really, really hard. The best that we can do is to predict the present, is to actually see what's going on right now.
Okay.
And the reason why is because there's a gestation period in technology where from when it's first discovered, even getting it working in the lab to when it becomes embedded in a Main Street way for most of the people on the planet, that is decades. That is decades. And so part of what we're trying to do is actually to see what's going on right now, just to understand it and what has been happening in the past 20 or 30 years, because that's going to be our tomorrow, is things that began 30 years ago. It's like this technology that we're using right now. That's been around for a long time. It shouldn't really have surprised us at all, because we've been doing it, but not very widely, and not many people were doing it. But the technology itself, if you were aware of it, if you looked at the past, you could see what we knew about it, and so you wouldn't be as surprised by.
Okay.
And so part of being, every great futurist that I know of is a great historian. It's spent increasing amounts of time looking at it, because we're kind of working on trajectories that have momentum. The things that are important tomorrow are things that began 2 or 3 decades ago, and they have their origins back then. So if you are able to kind of look back and see what that general arc is, it's easier to kind of imagine the direction that we're going to go into the future.
And it was interesting. In 2015, I went through Singularity University and really got exposed to a lot of the which is in your backyard, of course, in Silicon Valley. And it was interesting to see kind of the arc of technologies, and really, I haven't heard you say that, really focusing on the present and really understanding clearly what's happening today is actually the most powerful starting point. What was interesting, though, is I think there's a momentum to some of the technologies and people being aware of disruption. There's a momentum that people get caught up in. But what I've been struck by for you is that you're not afraid to look at the contrarian opinion. So, for example, you, in one of your recent blog posts on the Technium newsletter, you shared out Rodney and how he has really thought that things are going to be much slower from an AI perspective, and I think that that's what I really it's interesting, because you wrote the book. I have it right here beside me, about the future of where AI is going.
Right.
And I'd love to get your thoughts on how you let in kind of these other perspectives and still hold true to your own kind of guideposts of where you're going.
The rule of thumb, and I think it was, I can't remember who articulated it, but someone at the Institute for the Future. The rule of thumb is that we generally tend to overestimate the short-term effect or the short-term arrival of technologies, and we underestimate its long-term consequences. So we tend to think things are going to happen sooner than they are, and not be prepared for the immediate effects, and underestimate the long-term effects. So self-driving cars have been, foreseen, expected for a very, very long time. And the initial bits of it seem very exciting, but it's very, very clear that it's going to take a very long time to kind of get to where we imagine that they should be. And this is what Rodney Brooks's argument is, that it's not just a matter of kind of taking our existing transportation system and taking all the steering wheels off the cars.
Right.
That you actually need to have something that happened with the transition from horse carriages to cars, which is you have to rebuild the entire infrastructure. That we have to kind of rebuild roads and signs and traffic signals and everything else in order to accommodate this. So it's not a matter of just switching out the cars. It's a larger scale thing of making lanes for the self-driving cars to be in, to accommodating, pedestrian issues and fences, whatever it is. There's going to be a lot of very crucial infrastructural change that has to come along with the change in the car. And so that is one of the reasons why it will take a long time. And the other reason, of course, is that we are educating ourselves and constantly changing our mind about what we expect from these things. And this is particularly about AI itself, is even our concept of what AI is constantly changing. And so we have different expectations of it, and those expectations about whether we have it or don't or what it means will continue to change into the future, which in a certain sense makes it a long-term project. So right now we've had great advances, great benefits brought by the development of deep learning and neural nets. However, the thing about it that we don't appreciate is that is one tiny little narrow aspect of what we do as humans. This is pattern recognition.
Right.
So we have synthesized one type of hundreds of things that our brains do. And so there's still 99 other things that we need to do to even approach the kinds of things that we do. And secondly, we don't even want to do that. We don't even want to replicate humans. That's ridiculous and impossible. The whole benefit of AI is that it thinks differently, that it thinks different from us. And so that means that this frontier is huge and expanding with each advance that we do, changing our own perception of how far it is that we have to go and where we have to go. So there's this frontier that's itself moving, which makes progress very, very hard to kind of measure or even articulate. And so again, look at the past is helpful in terms of understanding. I think in some of these sometimes a better measurement of progress is not how close we're getting to the goal, but how far we've come.
Yeah, the gap, right? Because we're measuring against a movable future versus something that's a defined moment in time in the past. You've talked about the complex systems, and we talked a little bit about layering of systems. Do you think, and you talked about consciousness and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so you might need to redo what I'm saying, but the technology being aware of itself, almost being a replication of our biology, but it's just in a digital form.
Right.
And I am curious because I'm in the security world, and I do believe and I do believe that our systems are going to become they're going to have to become very much biological in the sense that, our finger, if we cut it, we don't need permission. The white blood cells don't ask for permission to go mitigate that threat. It just deploys. And then if I break it, I've got to go. I've actually got to go to the hospital. So in the security world, we have some automation, but it's not there at scale. It's not there as a global organism. And I did take that from your books. I'd love to get your thoughts on the digital creature that we've created and how it's going to evolve over the next couple of years, so that it mimics our biologies.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the AI concept of singularity in the sense of a superhuman intelligence that is like God that gets smarter. But I am appreciative of one aspect, one version of a singularity, which is that we are making a planet-sized machine of all our devices connected together. So we take all the servers in the world and all the phones of the world, and each of those could be thought of as a little neuron in itself. And we're making this sort of world of brain that's kind of an undesigned, inadvertent world brain, but it could have some emergent properties at some point. And that superorganism, in some senses, is an entity that is worth considering and trying to figure out how it works and what it does and what its characteristics are. And we don't really take it very seriously. It's almost like a poetic thing, but I think it actually is a real thing. Mm-hmm. And that is the computer that we're using and that we're going to run the planet on at the same time. And so there are lots of things about that. And one of the questions you can ask is, well, what's the security of it? How do we maintain, how can we trust it? One of the things I think that is kind of a fallacy right now in the computer world is this idea of kind of, corporate cybersecurity or national cybersecurity when there's only global security. It's like, unless we have a global system, so unless you have global security and everything is globally, secure, it's not going to matter about the national level or even your corporate level. And I think it's more like a public health thing where the security of the least secure device is sort of a real, and if your webcam is insecure, that matters to me because you don't have a right to run an insecure system if you're connected to the global machine. And so I think we may be moving into a more global planetary awareness about some of these issues, that we have a global economy. We don't really have national economies anymore. We've got a global economy. We've got a global machine. We have global security. And moving into that kind of planetary scale awareness is something that we're not doing a very good job on. Climate change is one of those. But I think that's where we're headed to.
Well, and you also, I think there's a reason why ML and AI are here kind of coming online at this roughly the time that IoT and this explosion of, it's serendipitous that we're here to deal with the complexity that's facing us. And you had said in your book, Out of Control, you said there was two things you wish you would write. Of course, armchair quarterbacking, writing it, 27 years later, you would put in neural nets, which we talked about, but then you also talked about the ecology of information. Right. And when I read that, I thought, oh, that's a really interesting concept. Maybe you can talk about that with our listeners, what you think ecology information is. Yeah.
So I think our recent experiences with social media and the way the information flows around the world, it's evident that it's a nonlinear system, that it's a system that's not very mechanical, but it has a lot of the attributes of like a natural system, like a meadow or rainforest, which has an ecosystem.
Sure.
And part of what you have with ecosystems is that you have very complicated relationships and interrelationships where it's hard to talk about an isolated thing itself. You always have to talk about it in the context of other things. And so information has a lot of those aspects where you see a tweet or something, it's not by itself. It's
Sure.
connected together in many, many ways, and its own existence is in relation to other things. That's one of the arguments I have about intellectual property and copyright, because we have a very mistaken idea of ownership about ideas, which I don't think anybody can own ideas. I don't think anybody can own data. And
well, I think you have a good point about that, though, because you say you've proven that there's been multiple people working on inventions,
sure.
Even though one person wins. Maybe, I mean, is that part of the ecology of information?
That is a part of it, is that ideas are being, most new things are recombination of existing things. And maybe there's one new idea, tiny one new idea that's needed to bring them all together. But that new idea is bringing together hundreds or thousands of other concepts that have been around a long time. Without those, there is no new thing. And so it's like an ecosystem in the sense that even if there's a new species evolved, that species is codependent on all the other species around it for its own survival and its own existence. And ideas, innovations have that same attribute that they require and they rest on and they involve thousands of other related ideas that already exist that other people have been promoting. And so so the idea of owning that, it's just the wrong framework. It's the wrong conceptual orientation. We need to kind of see it in a much more ecological sense of it being a community thing, by being a collective communitarian aspect of this. And that we don't, nobody kind of owns nature, but we can still do things with it. We can still exploit it. We can still try to manage it, even though we don't take in that ownership model.
It's interesting. We sort of have some models of like that emerging in technology with Linux, for example.
Yes.
Even though there's been like Red Hat companies that have, even though the code's out there, they've been able to commercialize their version of the value because someone has to maintain the code. And if everything's free, it just sort of like, like there's no you talk about ecology, there's no maintenance and patching and things applied to it, but still the underlying code set is free.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote a essay once called "Better Than Free," and which was all about the ways that you dealt with free things or made them more valuable. And the old joke that you're referring to, with the open source was, software is free, manuals $1,000, right? I mean, it's like figuring out how to use it is expensive, and so. Music's free, but if you want it immediately, so immediacy can become very valuable. Like, it's like eventually you'll see this movie for free, but if you want to see it as soon as it comes out, you're going to be willing to pay for it. So you're paying not for the movie, you're paying for immediacy.
Okay.
Personalization is another thing. Okay. Yeah, you can have the music for free, but if you want to have the acoustics personalized to your theater in your home theater, you'll pay. And again, you're not paying for the music, you're paying for the personalization. Personalization, immediacy, authenticity is another one.
Okay.
That's what NFTs are all about. It's like, yeah, it's a free JPEG, but if you want to be authentic, then you're paying for that. And so
what about nostalgia? What's your thought on nostalgia? I mean, what about 45 records? Do you think, I mean, that's $1 billion industry. I mean, what do you think about nostalgia?
It's a fad. It's not going to displace digital. It's another option.
Yeah.
So the embodiment is what I would call embodiment. So yeah, so the music is free, but if you want to have it embodied into plastic and touch it, then we'll charge you for it. And that's fine. So embodiment is a perfectly acceptable way of better than free. And so and that's part of what, by the way, my livelihood was giving talks. So yes, right now I'm virtual. It's free probably, but if you want to see me embodied in the flesh, you have to pay and pay a ticket or whatever. And so I think that's a recurring a theme is that the underlying data cannot really be owned. It's going to flow freely. It's kind of what technology wants it to do. It wants
Sure.
super distribution, but all these other things that are better than free can be used to. They have more scarcity in them.
Well, I've got to ask you about the metaverse and and we talk about people now working from home.
Yeah.
And sort of now we have this very interesting relationship between that we've got to not only keep those endpoints secure, but we've got to enable them for experiences that we as a creature are built with tens of thousands of years of eyeball interaction with people. And I'd love to get your thoughts on where you think AR, VR, and the metaverse are, and Web 3.0 are heading.
Yeah. So we were talking earlier about the kind of slow pace of some of these inventions, and VR is absolutely one of them. I mean, I experienced with Jaron Lanier the first virtual worlds in the 80s. And
Okay.
I thought, oh my gosh, this is coming. This is around the corner. And I was totally wrong. And, then 20 years later, we have the past 5 years, we've had the Quest and the
Oculus, yeah.
Oculus and the Microsoft HoloLens. And the curious thing is that the quality 5 years ago, we'll say, was not any better than it was from the 80s. The only difference was the setup in the 80s cost $1 million. And so the technology of smartphones made it possible to reduce the screens and the chips and the GPS and all the other stuff into something that was more affordable and smaller. But the actual experience was no different. It was just the fact now it was affordable. And that's it. Well, of course, that's a huge thing. We're still not there at what we need of these smart glasses to put them on, to have a see-through, to see VR. And so it's even though we can imagine it, and even though we might have some laboratory versions of it, our imaginations are way ahead of our ability to actually make it happen. And so I think this is still a 20-year meaning, say, augmented reality,
Sure.
the mirror world. So my version of the mirror world is based on augmented reality, where you put on clear glasses and you see the real world.
Yeah.
And on top of that, or embedded in that, is the virtual version of the real world, and imaginary things that you could do with altering that on top of the real world. And if you wanted to see imaginary worlds, you just you cover it, you make it black, and then you can do the VR at the same time. So the AR technology can do VR. VR cannot do the AR technology. Yeah. So the AR can make the mirror world, and the metaverse, which is mostly the AR, is a subset of that. And so we can kind of do VR pretty good right now. There's still, we can make it better. But the AR is really, I think, where the technological frontier is working, where I think there's a little bit of an argument. I think the AR world will be bigger economically, culturally than the VR world. But smart people like Mark Andreessen believe that the VR world is going to be bigger than the AR use. Remains to be seen. But this, like AI and some other biotech technologies, we can only do a little bit by thinking about them. These are technologies where we don't really know what they are until we make them and use them and live with them.
Sure.
And they're so complex that thinking about them
Doesn't make them
doesn't give
happen.
us answers. I call that
No.
that we actually have to have street experience, daily experience them to even figure it out what it is that they are, what they're good for, what they're bad for, what the effects are. So our thinkism will only go a little ways to kind of trying to figure out what they're good for. And we're still waiting for the technology to catch up. So I think it's going to be big. I think it's going to be a very powerful, but there's two things to say about it. In addition to the fact that it's going to be a long time. Secondly, it requires ubiquitous, cheap AI. There is no VR or particularly no augmented reality without ubiquitous, cheap, pervasive AI running behind it. Because in order to put on these glasses and have them recognize things, basically you're doing AI, AI perception constantly all the time and keeping track of things. That's a huge AI problem.
And I think the AI would have to be resident on the actual lens of the or on the, if not in the cloud, not the latency involved.
It's going to be both. It'll be both.
Okay.
Both in the glasses and on the cloud. And then the second thing to say about it is that it's basically a surveillance state. This is every glance, every gaze, every micro expression, every movement, every body language, everything, everybody you see has to be captured in order to be processed and rendered. And that means that the amount of data about you and your friends and what you do is just astronomical. And so all the issues that we've just begun to grapple with about privacy and surveillance and tracking is going to be like multiplied by 1 million. And so that's a huge area to figure out what we think about it, what we want and what we don't want. And again, we can think about those, but we're only going to figure out by actually doing them.
I built a couple VR spaces for my CIO community because it was about 6 months ago, and it was interesting that the group was in there, or as a small group compared to my Zoom group, because just even the tech guys just aren't quite aware how to put the goggles on and get into the spaces. They're not quite there. We're like 1994, 95 for the internet right now. But in there, they were asking good questions. Like, I had some nice artwork built and it was on the wall, and it was just showing them kind of the experience of what they could do with their businesses. But you know what? You put one piece of intellectual property in there, you put one board presentation, and you forget to take that down. Nobody knows where that's going to go. You've got the exfiltration issue and the privacy of, like, you didn't have to authenticate to get into that room. You didn't have to provide any sort of identity. Who knows if somebody's lurking in the background? So there's like, I think my 16-year-old, if my 16-year-old walks in with those glasses, I know that we're here. But for the commercial enterprise, it seems like we're a little bit, we still got some things to solve.
There's tons of things to solve. And again, I think that we might want to adopt a more ecological model of those IP issues rather than the idea of ownership. And a very, very fundamental example of that is your face and my face. So right now we see two faces here. My face and your face is the most personal thing about me, but it's also the most public thing about me. And so, like, the idea of I own my face is kind of weird because it is the thing that's the most public thing about me. If I walk around and say, okay, you can't look at my face, it's like, what? No, you're outside. I have a right to see your face. I mean, that's part of what it means to be outside. And so the facial recognition is this one kind of example of the conundrum that we have with this ideas of ownership, like who owns your face. And so I think it's just bad model to try and bring into, because when we have these VRs, AR worlds, these things are gonna be coming up all the time. People will be claiming ownership of things that I think is, again, this is the wrong model for it.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you could secure your face on the blockchain and an image and you had essentially a digital immutable record of it, you could almost secure it in some respects.
Well, you could secure one view of it. I'm not sure how you.
Depends how old you are, right, or how young you are.
Yeah. But no. So corporations and have trademark characters, and you could say they're the face of Batman's. You could say someone in theory could own. But even that, I think, is going to be we're going to have to kind of mess with that and transcend even that idea.
Yeah, because I agree with you, because there's the physical real estate, but then if someone goes to One Wall Street right now and then I'm sure someone's already done this, take a VR or take an image of that and then mint it as an NFT, essentially who owns does the real estate company own the actual exterior, or is it
Right.
the person that, it's sort of like the initial URLs, like McDonald's.com.
Right. Yeah. Well, the thing about NFTs that people forget is that they do not intersect copyright at all. There's just it's a completely orthogonal universe to copyright. Having an NFT gives you zero copyright claims at all, unless that is part of the contract. And in most cases, it has not been. But it's a separate plane, so to speak. I'm suggesting that we not further the kind of ownership model into that world.
Well, it's a great concept to and I hope that's what happens, Kevin. And as we wrap up, I'd love to just end with one question for you.
Sure.
If you could go back into your 40s and 50s, and I'm just picking kind of that 2-decade mark, but maybe it's between 45 and 55. How would you view the world now for people that are sort of like at that next part of their careers and their lives? How would you view the world now if you could kind of reverse the clock for listeners, and how would you approach the next decade of your life if you were 45 again?
I'm not sure I would do much different. Maybe I don't really quite understand the question.
You've been doing some writing about thinking and about how to approach like there's a third option. And
yeah.
And so I think sometimes the innovators, we can get stuck in patterns of thought. And of course, you got to turn your camera and show people like the 2 stories of books that you have. You're obviously have read thousands of books,
right.
but you said that changing people's minds is really why you read books. And I'm just curious how you would coach someone to think about the world
I think when I was 45, one of the realizations that I kind of came up with is because of my success at Wired and writing books was when you're really young, when you're first starting out, your energies are really kind of devoted to doing the job well, not getting fired, basically. Whatever it is, I want to do it really well. I don't want to screw up or get fired or disappoint somebody. And then if you're lucky enough to kind of have some mastery of that, then you begin to think about, well, I mean, I'm doing it well, and I'm getting paid, but I really want to do something that that I love doing. Okay. And so you start to have the second circle of like things that I can do well and things that I love doing, and if I can get paid for that. And so at some point you get this kind of like this triangle where you're doing something that other people value, you can do it really well, and you love doing it. And that's kind of maybe where you get to be when you're 45. And it seems like, okay, you finally reached it. And for me, I had an epiphany about then, because I started to have a lot more opportunities because of that success, where I was getting offered. I had a lot more choices about, okay, there's now kind of a very long line of hundreds of things that I could do that I'm good at, that people want done, and that I would enjoy doing. What am I going to do? And that was when I realized that I was only going to do things that nobody else would do. Either they couldn't do it or they didn't want to do it. And that came from my time at Wired, where I was trying to assign story ideas. So I'd have an idea, try to find writers to this great idea, and I couldn't find any writer who thought it was a good idea. It was like, that's not a good idea. Oh, I guess it was okay. I have a lot of ideas. I have some other ideas. And then we go on to some other ideas. And then later on, the first idea that I had would come back to me and say, that is a good idea. I really should have someone do that. And I would try again to pitch it, to sell it to somebody. And again, it would be batted down. No, that's not a good idea. Who's interested in that? Oh yeah, okay, you're right. And then I go on to my other ideas and go on. But then maybe occasionally there'd be this one idea that would not go away and would come back. And then I tried to sell it and I couldn't. And then it was like, okay, I get it. I really think this is a great idea. I'm the only one that thinks this is interesting. I'm the only one who can do it. And those turned out to be my best ideas, my best things. It was the ones that I could not sell. So I am in the habit of trying to give away my ideas all the time. I am always trying to give away my best ideas, because if someone else does it, that means, oh, that's an idea I don't have to do because someone else is going to do it. So I'm trying to give away ideas to find out the ones that nobody will take.
Okay? And then you decided you were going to tackle.
And then I'll have to do those, and those are the ones I have to do. And if I do them, they're going to be good because nobody else is doing it. And while you're doing it, I don't have to worry about competition. I've been trying to give it away for decades. It's very easy to go along. It's a natural thing. So I'm a big believer in trying to give your ideas away.
Give the ideas away, and then the ones that remain are the ones that you tackle.
Right. If you still think it's a good idea. So the shorter version of that is someone in the 45 or 50 may be in the position to really be asking the question about what they do next is, can I imagine anybody else doing this? Can anybody else do this? Because if they can, then that means that it's not the best thing for me. I want to be doing things that nobody else is going to be doing. So one of the projects I did recently was called Vanishing Asia. It's this huge book. It's so big, I divide up into 3 volumes of 1,000 pages. There's 9,000 images of the distinct period part of Asia. I worked on it for 50 years. And believe me, there's nobody else who could do this or would do this or did it. And it's very much me. It's a very kind of overwhelming, over the top. It's a compulsion almost on my part, the amount of energy I spent doing it. Believe me, there's no market for this. There's nobody in the world saying, we want some pictures. We want more pictures of Vanishing Asia. It was like totally a passion project of my own.
Passion project
that I had to do. I know, I'm not competing against anybody. And, it remains to be seen whether anybody else is interested in it, but I didn't care because all I wanted out of it was one copy for myself, because I was the audience for it. And so some of my essays and other things begin that same way as trying to find something that I have passion for, that enthusiastic, that I can do well, that nobody else is going to do.
Yeah, but I think that's a massive learning point that you just made, because you have instead of trying to figure out who's going to buy something, you focus on your own internal enthusiasm for a particular topic, and then that in the process that actually comes out, and that gives people, they can see that enthusiasm, and they want a piece of it. And
that's absolutely true. That's how we started Wired. We made Wired, and Wired was very consciously created for us, the creators, as an audience. We were bored. We wanted a magazine that we wanted to read. I told every single writer, who's your audience? It's not the 11th grader out there. It's not your grandma. Your audience is me. And I am,
Right.
I've read everything. I am totally bored by, you have to amaze me because this is what we're making the magazine for. I am the audience. I want this magazine for me. So, so write to me. And so, yeah, you know, I can't say we don't care whether anybody else read it. We did, but we
Sure.
knew just from our own experience that if I could make a magazine that I wanted to read, there would be other people reading it.
Right, right. Fantastic. Kevin, this has been a thrill. Round two, 5 years later, which is fantastic. We talked about some of your passion projects with Vanishing
Sure.
Asia and Recommendo.
Yeah, right. So Vanishing Asia, by the way, is available on Amazon. I mean, you can pre-purchase it. It's actually not shipping yet, but you can go to Amazon. It's a big book. I tell you, the box, I mean, literally, it's bigger than the screen right here. Weighs 30 pounds. And so Vanishing Asia is available. And the other thing that I tout these days is my weekly newsletter. Every Sunday, there's 3 of us. We send you a one-pager of 6 recommended things that tips, stuff, destinations, people to follow, books to read, stuff to watch, tool to get, whatever it is. A very, very brief one-page note called Recommendo with 1 M. And sign up. It's a free newsletter. We've done, I don't know, 4 years, 5 years, every Sunday morning. Get your little dose of recommended stuff.
Well, I'll put the link to that and to the book. And I know that Asia has been a huge part of your journey through life, and I'm looking forward to getting the book myself.
Sure.
I appreciate very much spending time with us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed it. Thanks for the great questions. So long, everybody.